Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're having a special conversation today with Green Party presidential candidate Howie Hawkins. We also have Angela Walker, our vice presidential candidate as well, on the call with him. And we have Madelyn Hoffman, who is running for U.S. Senate here in New Jersey. So we welcome everybody today to the call and to the special conversation. And take it away, Howie.
Okay, thank you. Well, yes, my name's Howie Hawkins. I am the Green candidate for U.S. President. I'm a retired Teamster, been an activist all my life since the 1960s. One thing I did in the early 1970s was get involved in the anti-nuclear power and weapons movement and helped organize the Clamshell Alliance, which had a big occupation at the Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant. 1977, 2,000 of us occupied the site, 1,414 of us were arrested and put in National Guard armies for 10 days, which led to the explosion of the anti-nuclear movement across the country. And until the Obama administration subsidized with loan guarantees 6 nukes in Georgia and South Carolina, no new nukes were ordered after we did that mass occupation. And 4 of those 6 nukes have failed down there in South Carolina and Georgia due to cost overruns and construction delays. So I was going to say a few words about the nuclear issue, this being the 75th anniversary just passed of the bombing of Hiroshima. And we're in a situation where the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has moved its doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight. And they've had this clock since the late 1940s. We're in a new nuclear arms race. The United States started modernizing their nuclear forces under the Obama administration, continuing it under the Trump administration, and it's destabilized the balance of terror, of nuclear terror. So the Russians have followed suit, the Chinese have followed suit, the Indians, the Pakistanis, more countries want to get nuclear power. And what they're doing is they're changing strategic nukes, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the submarine-launched missiles, and the air-launched missiles from the bombers, making them 6 times faster, hypersonic. So they used to say, we'll launch on warning so we can retaliate. That was the deterrence. Now the nukes are so fast, there isn't time to launch on warning. So these nuclear powers are going to launch on anticipation that the other side is launching, which is crazy. You make a mistake and you blow up the world. And then they're putting more nuclear weapons into conventional forces, tactical nukes. And these tactical nukes are no joke. They're much bigger than the bomb that fell on Hiroshima. And they have this crazy military doctrine called escalate to de-escalate. The U.S. has it, Russia has it. And what they mean is, if we're in a conventional war and we're losing, we'll use some tactical nukes to throw back the other side. Then we'll de-escalate, which is never going to happen because we know from Daniel Ellsberg, who was a nuclear war planner before he was a Vietnam War planner, that once one nuke starts flying, they're all going to fly and they're going to blow up the world. So this is a very dangerous situation. So our campaign is calling for peace initiatives, 75% cut in military spending, withdrawal from these 9 endless wars we're engaged in, getting out of our 800 foreign military bases, pledging no first use of nuclear weapons, and disarming to a minimum credible deterrent, and then going to the other 8 nuclear powers and saying, we're no threat to you anymore, tensions are reduced, we want to negotiate complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. And we go there with world public opinion. 3 years ago, 122 nations agreed to the text of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that achievement. And hardly anybody in the United States even knows that, because the political leadership of both parties and all the presidential candidates have not talked about this issue. So one of our goals in our campaign is to try to make it a top campaign issue, because this is an existential threat. And then there's the question of nuclear power, which is linked to nuclear weapons in the fuel cycle. And we're in a terrible situation now because we got the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, is for expanding nuclear power. Nuclear power costs 2 to 3 times more than solar and wind power over its life cycle. And we just saw these nukes that are failing. They tried to build with subsidies under the Obama and Biden administration. And Biden is for reprocessing spent fuel, which has failed. They tried to reprocess decommissioned fuel from nuclear weapons in Barnwell, South Carolina. It failed. And the Bush and Obama administration looked into this, and they said it won't work. But Biden's saying he's going to go back to it. So, and of course, he supports the nuclear modernization program, which he helped initiate. And we're in a situation back in the late 40s. Truman had a commission set up called the Paley Commission, which was to look what is our post-petroleum energy future going to look like, because they thought we were going to run out of petroleum. And the commission recommended the Eisenhower solar power. And Eisenhower chose nuclear power, the so-called peaceful atom. And it was linked to the weapons. It was to make the weapons more acceptable. And then the fuel cycle is linked. Like I just mentioned the Barnwell. And then you can think about uranium mining. This caused devastation. Like at Church Rock in New Mexico in 1979, uranium mine tailings spilled into the Rio Puerco River, which still isn't cleaned up, but contaminated many Navajo water sources. So these two issues are connected. And Trump, look, Trump is a dummy. He's got a childlike make-believe thing. You know, coronaviruses just don't go away. The only thing he said about nuclear weapons is to the generals he wants more of them. He's a fool. But Biden is a danger too. And when I hear people say in New Jersey, oh, I might vote for Biden to get rid of Trump, look, Trump is toast, especially in New Jersey. And if it's close in New Jersey, that means Biden's losing. But that's probably not going to happen. So the question is, you going to vote pro-nukes or no nukes? So that's my little statement. And I'll pass it on to Madelyn.
Thank you, Howie. I think we'll be taking some questions after both Howie and I are finished. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the prohibition, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, the treaty for which ICANN received the Nobel Peace Prize. Howie mentioned that was in 2017. The 122 nations gathered together and worked out a treaty agreeable to all 122, except that none of the 122 countries who are involved in negotiations were any one of the nuclear powers. The nuclear powers boycotted it. However, if 50 countries sign and ratify the treaty, it will become law. And so we are several years out, 3 years out, and we have 44 states, countries around the world who have both signed and ratified this treaty. And it is as strong as any that has ever been written, because those countries that don't have nuclear weapons, those countries who would be affected by the use of nuclear weapons, should that ever happen, they understand how dangerous these weapons are. So it's a prohibition on just about everything that could be done with a nuclear weapon, from production to use. We need only 6 more countries internationally to sign on to it. And we need to have our politicians and our leaders and our candidates address the issue of putting the brakes on nuclear war. The treaty, Howie also mentioned the modernization treaty, the modernization efforts that began under President Obama. The irony of all that was he pledged to do this, to spend between $1.2 trillion and $1.7 trillion on upgrading and modernizing the entire US nuclear arsenal so that it is bigger, badder, more powerful than it was even at the height of the Cold War. And he did it in order to get enough senators to ratify a nuclear disarmament treaty. So it was the last nuclear disarmament treaty that was agreed to by the US Senate. At the very same time that happened, the US is embarking on this upwards of $1.7 trillion project over the next, now not 30 years, but 25 years or so. So we're sending, as always, the U.S. sends mixed messages to the rest of the world about what it intends to do. At the same time that the United States is upgrading, and I hate to say modernizing, I always put it in quotes when I write it, because how can you really, you don't need to modernize or upgrade nuclear weapons. You need to just eliminate them. We need to eliminate them, get rid of them. They're not necessary. So what in the world are we doing, quote unquote, modernizing them? They're barbaric. They're barbaric and they kill indiscriminately. And so words like modernizing and upgrading don't make any sense. At the same time, the $1.7 trillion price tag, what else could we be using that money for that we're not using it for tuition-free college. We're not using it to forgive student debt. We're not using it for single-payer, expanded and improved Medicare for all. We're not using it for any of the things that this country, community programs that this country desperately needs. And on top of that, as Howie mentioned briefly, we're involved in at least 7, if not 9, illegal wars around the world. And virtually every one of those wars, we risk confrontation with a nuclear power. In Afghanistan, there's Pakistan on its border. And then next to Pakistan is India. One wrong step, who knows? Syria, the United States and Russia both had military bases and operations in Syria for a number of years. Somebody gets mad at somebody else. One country gets mad at another country, and look what could happen there. Every one of these illegal wars can be a tripwire. There can be a tripwire in any of them. And then Donald Trump took us out of the Iran nuclear deal. People around the country worked really hard to get that Iran nuclear deal passed. It wasn't perfect, but it was one instance in which countries negotiated together to put an end to nuclear war or the use of nuclear weapons. And when Donald Trump took us out, my opponent, Senator Cory Booker, who at the time of the nuclear deal, I was the director of a nonprofit peace organization, and we lobbied Senator Booker like crazy to get him to support it. And he only supported it after there were enough people for it to make it carry anyway. So his vote really didn't require much courage on his part. Anyway, what was his response to getting out of the Iran nuclear deal? Well, I just don't know if we should renegotiate another one. I don't know if I would support another one. I just don't know. So what I'm trying to say with that example and also the Obama example is that both political parties are not only committed to nuclear weapons and spending trillions of dollars on nuclear weapons that are no longer needed, that 122 nations, that's about 2/3 or more of the 194 member United Nations, have all said no. They've all said, we're tired of waiting for the nuclear powers to do what they were supposed to do. From 1970, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was supposed to say, well, we'll all sign it, the countries around the world will sign it, with the understanding that nobody else should obtain nuclear weapons, no other countries, and those that had them would make sure to reduce them and eliminate them. And this has just not happened. And so the 122, yes, Venezuela as well, and all the unilateral coercive economic measures in countries like Nicaragua and Cuba and the like, creating all kinds of tension. We don't get out of the wars we're in. We're not easing up on sanctions. We're not easing tensions around the world in any way, shape, or form. And this is not just Donald Trump. This is Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, the Clintons, if you want to go all the way back that far. We have to be clear that these issues, and one of the other nuclear power is Israel. Although Israel still does not admit that it has nuclear weapons. But with all the tension in the Middle East, I'll just add this in, and it's kind of tangential to what I'm saying, but not really. In 2013, the world was under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, where all the nuclear powers were supposed to be reducing their nuclear weapons. There was an international call for a conference to strategize about creating a nuclear weapons-free Middle East, because that would seriously reduce tensions, and it makes sense. Except that just before that conference was scheduled to take place, Israel and the United States backed out of it. And when I say just before, I mean just before, like 2 weeks before. And their excuse was, there's too much tension in the Middle East. This isn't the time to do it. Well, I submit that there's too much tension in the world. You're hearing, heard Howie talk about it. We're all aware of it. There's too much, that's the reason to eliminate nuclear weapons, because of the tension that exists around the world. That's the reason to enter these treaties. And if there's any way we can push our elected officials to honor that treaty from 2017, we should do it. If anybody wants to know what states and countries have signed and which ones haven't, the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, you can go to the ICANN website and learn all about it. It's essential. It is for the survival of our world, our country and our world, that we take the issue of nuclear weapons seriously, and we disarm and we reverse course. Because I was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki 5 years ago for the 70th anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I was against nuclear weapons before that, but I had no idea how deeply impactful those nuclear bombs were until I was actually there. I mean, intellectually, you can understand it, but you don't understand it with everything else you have until, I didn't anyway, until I was there. And on that note, it's necessary to reverse the nuclear arms race and be honest and realize that both the Democrats and the Republicans are committed to these abominations. And the Japanese have been trying to warn the world since 1945, or maybe 10 years after that there should be no more Hiroshimas, no more Nagasakis, no more people left as victims to these horrible bombs, or worse. And I'll end right there so we can take some questions.
Thank you, Madelyn, and thank you, Howie. I guess just for people that are just new to all this, can you inform us a little bit about the GPACS committee?
Oh yes, I can do that. It's the Peace Action Committee of the Green Party of the United States, and I think Howie and I have both signed their pledge for candidates, the anti-war pledge. It's the committee that of the Green Party of the U.S. that addresses issues of war and peace. And I was fortunate that just about a month ago, I was elected to be one of their 2 co-chairs. For the moment, I'm sort of, they know that I'm running for political office, so I can only do so much. But when the campaign is over, unless I'm voted in as U.S. Senator, I'll be working with the GPUSA's Political Action Committee. So
Thank you, Madeline.
You're welcome.
Now we can open it up to the floor for any questions.
Yes, I have a question.
Great.
And I just
Go
want to
ahead.
do a shout out to Angela Walker. Angela, this is Stuart Chen Hayes. I am the current voice of Twitter. And so I just want you to know that I'm having so much fun. Actually, she and I we just tweeted each other while this was going on. So, Angela, I am currently feigning, and it's really fun to be able to hear your voice. I'm also a queer green and a queer socialist. And that's really where my question is rooted for both of you, for Madeline as well. My family is primarily Taiwanese American, although I'm a white guy. And multiple family members are dual nationals. And we are extremely worried about what's going on right now in Taiwan. We've watched both the Democrats and the Republicans ratchet up, attempting to create a new Cold War with China. We've watched people use the struggles for democracy in Hong Kong with really nefarious ends. And what's happening right now in Taiwan, of course, is there's no, everybody's taken away their recognition of Taiwan, but Taiwan's taught the world how to do the virus, how to prevent the virus really well. But all the Democrats and Republicans seem to be able to do is send more weapons of war to Taiwan. What do you all have to say to ways that we can build more Asians into the Green Party? And how can we do it knowing the horrific history of what's happened in Japan and what's currently threatening? I think China's now about to open its first military base. How can we do this without war? And how can we do this in a way that will build more Greens into the party?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, because my phone says we're muted, but good. Well, Angela's right here. I'll just say initially, the saber rattling we're doing at mainland China is not helping the situation because it's making it impossible to talk rationally about things like Taiwan or Hong Kong or the Uyghurs or nuclear weapons or climate change. And think about it this way. You know, we insist on having our Navy patrolling right off the coast of China. What if China was in the Gulf of Mexico or in the San Francisco Bay? You know, we got to have a perspective on this. You know, China is afraid of us. Well, let's reduce their fears so we can talk about these things directly to each other. And, you know, Trump's basically racist China baiting, whether it's the virus or the trade, is making it worse as well. And it reinforces the nationalist narrative of the ruling party in China, mainland China. And I would add that the other thing I would give Taiwan credit for is going to single-payer health care recently. And look what it did to help them deal with the coronavirus. You want to add to that, Angela?
Not really. First off, I am a mutual stan. I just want you to know that I just responded to your tweet, because I didn't know we weren't muted. So I love you too. And basically everything Howie just said. I mean, you can't have a rational conversation, a reasonable conversation about, you know, de-escalating and things like that if you are the one that is being the biggest bully on the block. And you can't, you know, you can't just walk up to people and expect for them to listen to you when you have not done what you need to do to create a climate of cooperation where we can have those discussions. So just to tag on to what Howie said.
Thank you both.
And I would tag on a little bit from the time I was in Japan, because there was concern about both Japan and North Korea at the time, 5 years ago. And the people who organized the conferences I attended were all anti-nuclear activists for a long time. And we started talking about this, and they said, well, yeah, I mean, people are trying to make us afraid in Japan of China and of North Korea. And they said, we're not buying it. We're not buying it. We just all need to sit down and talk about it. You know, just so simply, matter of factly, we'll sit down and talk about it. And at the same time, the United States was lobbying Abe, Prime Minister Abe, to support legislation that would take out the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which has prohibited Japan from being in a war since the end of World War II. 75 years, 70 years, now 75 years of peace. But we were trying to change that, so that the United States was trying to change that so that Japan could help us to fight against Iran and anyone else. So yeah, I just echo everything that Angela and Howie said. And I also I'm so grateful that they're here on this call.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Any other questions for Howie? All right, Barry, go right ahead.
Yeah, more of a sharing your feelings more than a question. I live in a town called Forked River, and all my friends here in New Jersey know my situation here. I live exactly 1 mile from Ground Zero, Oyster Creek Nuclear Generating Station here in Forked River. And the people in the town have loved it because of the tax benefits of having a nuclear power plant. But recently, the plant, well, it's in the process of being decommissioned. But before the decommissioning started, the original owners, was a company called Amergen, sold it to I guess I would consider them a startup company that now has been assigned the rights to decommission the plant. And to let you know, this particular company, the main political boss from the state of New Jersey sits on their board. And in seeing what's going on and the reactions of the people who live within my town, which all of us are probably within a mile of where the plant is. It's not a very big town. The things that are going on are very, very scary. And my comment is that nuclear power, whether it's bombs, whether it's generating electricity, human beings having that in their hands is like having a child with a gun in their hand. And they don't know what they're going to do with the spent fuel rods, etc. Odds are here, a mile from my house, the spent fuel rods are going to be here for the remainder of time, as far as I can see. And just to go along with what you guys have been saying, that there is no place for nuclear bombs, nuclear power, nuclear anything until the human race advances a whole hell of a lot from where it is. And I just wanted to share that with you guys. Thanks
yeah, I'll
much.
just add a little to the share. You know, you talk about the corruption of the company took over the decommissioning and its connection to the power structure in New Jersey. We just had a $60 million bribe or a charge that the industry put on top politicians in Ohio in return for subsidies to keep nuclear plants that are no longer economically viable functioning. And then the next week, a similar case in Illinois. This industry has been an economic failure. It's probably the biggest industrial disaster since World War II of any industry. And now they're bribing the politicians to stay alive. It's disgusting.
Yeah. And Howie, the same company that I'm talking about, it was attempting to get the decommissioning for what's it, Indian Point? What's the one in New York?
Yeah, Indian Point.
Yeah, Indian Point.
And the Attorney General of the state of New York stopped them. So I guess New Jersey doesn't feel as strongly.
New Jersey wins in corruption. That's what, and the Democratic Party machine, the Democratic / Republican Party machine.
I don't have time to go into Andrew Cuomo, but we'll let it go for now.
Do we have any other questions for Howie or Madelyn? Go ahead, Matthew.
I have a question. Obviously, the nuclearization of certain countries poses a great threat to young people. And I was wondering if both Madelyn Hoffman and Howie Hawkins and Angela, she wants to join in too, if they could comment on what denuclearization would mean for young people.
Oh, who wants to go first? I'll take it only in the sense that I'm thinking immediately of what I encountered in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because the average age now of the survivors of the atomic bombs is now middle 80s. So 5 years ago. It was a little bit younger, but people were concerned that when they died, the survivors were concerned that when they died, concern about nuclear weapons might die with them. And so they embarked on a very intense project of education, the survivors with young people, because some of these people, some of the survivors, and one had burns all over his back for ever since the bomb dropped, and he lived in that pain with those burns on his back for the rest of his life. And so you learn best, I think, about the dangers when you talk to someone who has been directly affected, like he was. And what got me is not only he, but another survivor. They apologized to the world. They apologized to those of us who were there and to the world for not doing enough to stop nuclear weapons. And I mean, I had to just shake my head because they're doing more than many. So clearly it's important for everyone to know the stories of what happened and how dangerous nuclear weapons are. And when you hear somebody say, oh, just nuke them all, say, do you know what you just said? Do you realize what you just said? Let me tell you what it's like if you're nuked. Let me describe it for you. Let me share those voices with you. Because, you know, to denuclearize the world would remove a very, very serious threat. As the Japanese said, the nuclear weapons and humanity are on a collision course. So we have to change course and change direction.
And just tagging on to what Madelyn said, because Madelyn, that's exactly where I am with it. I mean, I grew up in the 80s, and I remember there were a whole lot of like songs and movies about, you know, the nuclear apocalypse. And to grow up under the shadow of that, with all the other things that were oppressing you, but to know that these things existed that should not exist, that can, you know, you literally, I think it's obscene. There is an obscenity to creating something that can wipe out something you didn't even build. You did not make this planet. This planet is not yours to destroy as you see fit because you got a hair up your behind about somebody you don't like, or, you know, it's insulting. It's obscene. There's an obscenity to this. And I think that for me, being part of a party and part of a campaign that is very explicitly anti-nukes and letting young people know that we understand and stand with them, that in a lot of ways, looking at climate change, we have stolen from their future. And de-escalating and removing nukes is a way of taking this horrible, awful possibility from over their head, that at some point, someone can take your future from you and everybody you know based on something wrong with them. We take that off the table. And I think that it's necessary.
Yeah, I think for the meaning for youth today is that they know they're threatened by climate change, but I don't think they know so much about nuclear weapons. I remember coming up, one of the first radicalizing experiences for me was being told to dive under my desk and put my hands over my head in preparation for a nuclear war. Yeah. And I knew that wasn't going to save my little behind. And then I read in the Weekly Reader about the peaceful atom. And I got to high school and I read a book called Our Synthetic Environment by Louis Herbert, who was really Murray Bookchin. It came out before even Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And it talked about how dangerous nuclear power was. And so I was mad again because I've been misled. And so when we say we want to make the nuclear arms race a top campaign issue, one of the things I have in mind is that the young people need to know this, because they're going to get mad about it like they are about the climate, and they got the energy, and they don't feel defeated because it's their future. A lot of them will come out, and you look at all the social movements through history, it's the young people that spearheaded them. So I think that's why for us it's so important to make the nuclear arms race, the nuclear weapons, and the whole nuclear question a top campaign issue. And the young people don't know about it today because the two major parties don't talk about it. And the corporate state media for the two-party corporate state doesn't talk about it either. So we got to be the trumpeters about this issue.
Thank you, Howie. I do have a question also. Does anybody else have questions first, though? I know Howie and Angela have another meeting shortly. So Justin, real quick, go ahead.
Yeah, this isn't really a question. It's funny how he mentioned that story because I have a similar story about when I've had to first learn about what nuclear energy, nuclear power, or nuclear destruction was. I was in about 5th grade years ago. There's a nuclear power plant in Delaware, which is only 30 minutes away from where I live. And there was a message sent out that, there's trouble going on at the plant. There's a possible meltdown coming. And I remember, like, where the hell do we go? Where do you go if a nuclear power plant only about, 50 to 30 to 50 miles away is about to go up? When you think about it, that should be a distance, but it's not. And I also remember, it was clear, but, that's something that I'll never forget. And I remember because my uncle was in the Army and the National Guard. He was guarding that base when 9/11 happened. And it was an absolute panic because they were worried that that could be a target since it was in the Northeast. So how insane is it that what we're using to provide electricity for ourselves could very easily be turned into something that could kill us all within the matter of 30 minutes? And that was like how duck and cover was a radicalizing experience for you. That was at a very young age, a radicalizing experience for me. And ever since then, I've very much been opposed to nukes because there still is a nuclear power plant only half an hour away that if one thing goes wrong, we could all go up. And even if anything doesn't get destroyed, there's radiation floods that could destroy. The Delaware Bay is polluted enough. It doesn't need a nuclear power plant right there. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Justin. Julie.
Yeah, does the Green Party have any position, excuse me, this is a 2-part question. Does the Green Party or your campaign have any position on the unacknowledged nukes that Israel holds? And is there any acknowledgement that the byproducts of the nuclear industry, the depleted uranium, is poisoning Fallujah and Basra, Iraq, where doctors have, because of the weapons they used during the war, doctors are advising women do not have babies because they're being born deformed and sickly. And that's one of the criteria of genocide, is when you impact a population's ability to reproduce. Is that brought in at all to the campaign or the party platform?
Or the party platform, you said?
Either or. Either.
Yeah, well, it's part of both. I mean, the Green Party in our campaign supports BDS, boycott, divest, sanctions, and not giving Israel a blank check, including its nuclear blackmail of other countries in the region. And, BDS until they respect Palestinian rights. And if the U.S. didn't give 100% backing militarily to Israel, that would, I think, like we did with South Africa when we put sanctions on them, make them come to terms with some of the realities if we stand for human rights. So that's one thing. The depleted uranium in Fallujah, that's a terrible mess. That's another aspect of the nuclear fuel cycle. They put it in the weapons that are not nuclear, but they are nuclear. And you're right about the health impact in Iraq. And we owe them reparations for that. As Colin Powell said, if you break it, you own it. We should get our troops out of there and get people in there that can help them clean up that mess and provide the medical care that people need dealing with the consequences.
Yeah, and my campaign also is a very strong, has a very strong part in it against the Israeli occupation of Palestine. As we know, my opponent, Senator Cory Booker, says, you know, if the occupation of Israel is your occupation by Israel of Palestine is your issue, you better find yourself another candidate. I'm that other candidate in this particular race. I was in Israel and on the West Bank in 2013, that conference that never happened for a nuclear weapons-free Middle East. There were people inside of Palestine and Israel that who put it together themselves. You know, if Israel won't, if the world wouldn't come to Israel, they invited. I mean, if Israel wouldn't come to the world, they invited everybody there, and there were all kinds of stories about the one nuclear power plant in Israel that has not been, because it hasn't been officially declared as present, it has not been inspected in years and years and years. And the impact of the nuclear fallout or the wastes from that plant has been felt by Palestinians living close to it. And they're discounted because they don't have the sophisticated measuring sticks that other places have, but they don't have the sophisticated equipment because they can't get it. They're not allowed to have it. So it is really important to say with certainty that, you know, in my campaign, that Israel is a nuclear power, whether it chooses to admit it or not, and that has an impact on the rest of the region. So when, you know, the finger is pointed at Iran, so well, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons, never has, and probably won't, but you know who does. And then, of course, when I was the director of the peace organization, we put together information about depleted uranium and all of the very dangerous impacts of it and how it was used in the Middle East and elsewhere, not just in Iraq. But so yeah, I echo what Howie said there, and then, you know, have some of my own stuff to add.
Thank you, Madelyn. And also, Julie, if you have any other specific questions, Madelyn is one of the co-chairs of GPACs. Obviously, they can also bring this up and work on tailoring something to bring up to vote for our platform, because we do constantly update our platform. That's one great thing about the Green Party. I was a national committee member for a delegate for 2 years, and literally almost every month we would have numerous planks come up for vote, and obviously definitely we're always growing and expanding. So before, I know Howie and Angela have to leave. I have any other questions, or we're good? Okay. My question is more, because again, I'm 40. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the whole big media, blockbuster movie, guns, Armageddon, things like that. Now you see the shift to trying to make militarization cool with all these Call of Duty video games. What is your take, Howie, Angela, Madelyn, on this whole new era of trying to indoctrinate youth into the military through these shooter and video games? Have you come across this? Has this been brought up by other people, or have you had any personal experience on it just from family even?
My experience is people go into the military for economic opportunities, job training. People in my family in the military, that's why they went in. It wasn't video games, but I've never played a video game, so I am probably the wrong person to ask. I don't know if you have anything to add. We got to get in our workshop here in a second.
I think that, you know, anytime you see a rise of where it's coming from the White House, it's coming from the top, it's the same Cold War stuff we saw in the 80s, like, you know, indoctrinating young people into, you know, being soldiers and standing up for your country and being patriotic. It's the same crap. It's the same game they're playing. And so, you know, people just need to know this playbook has not changed. This is the intent behind it, and they're not slick.
Yeah, and, you know, I'll just add that, again, there is a whole issue or a whole movement of counter recruitment, because when George W. Bush, the No Child Left Behind Act was passed, that basically said that every student could be approached by the military unless the parent opted out, whereas prior to that it was an opt-in. You could tell the schools if you wanted the military to contact you, your kids. So we just have to work harder, continue to work harder at counter recruitment. There are other options. There should be other options for those kids who, join the military for economic reasons. And we would set up tables with information about other options for the kids. And we just need to continue to expand that and continue to talk about that.
Thank you both. Any last remarks, Howie and Angela, before you have to jump off the meeting?
Well, thanks for having us,
Thank you for having us.
Oh,
and we enjoyed the conversation. And
Thank you.
looks like we got to get into this other meeting. So thank you.
well,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you and good luck. And obviously you can continue to follow them on howiehawkins.us and obviously Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter as well.
Take care. Be in touch with
And Madelyn, any last remarks?
No, I think I've said a lot. I just was very glad that Howie and Angela could join us. I think our campaigns dovetail real nicely on this issue of war and peace. I think war and peace and nuclear weapons are not distractions to the main issues, but the key issues, like at the core of what's wrong with the direction of this country. But neither the Democrats nor the Republicans want to talk about it because there's too much money involved, too many people profiteering from it, and they both have the same point of view. And so they say, well, why, is anybody raising it? We both agree. Don't raise anything that won't show us one different from the other. And I say, because the military spending is the issue, and the wars are draining our budget, wars are draining our treasury, and at least 57 cents on every dollar of our tax money is going to war instead of the other, like 6 cents on every dollar is going to education. There's a huge gap and it's wrong, and we have to work to correct it, change it, and our voices are more important than ever to do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Madelyn. And again, I thank Howie Hawkins, Angela Walker, Madelyn Hoffman for coming on and hosting and participating in this special conversation. We're going to continue to try to feature things like this throughout the rest of the year and during the campaigns. And obviously, you could check us out, gpnj.org. And we welcome and thank you for attending.